All right, great to see everyone. Thanks for joining us for our information session on Propel. I think most of you might be aware that we've been working on a nonprofit accelerator program for a few months now. It's an extenuation of a program we piloted last year and realized needed to be much more intensive and much more wraparound. And so we're excited to give an overview today to interested nonprofits because we will be opening applications for the first cohort on Friday. So we're going to run through some slides, myself and Dr. Glenn Ferris, who's on our Nonprofit Alliance program team. Let us just get through the slides and then we'll have lots of time for any questions. We can go back just so we can get through the core information in case any information coming later in the presentation would answer your question. If you're not aware, we were the Interagency Committee for Children, Families, and the Community, but we rebranded in September as the Nonprofit Alliance of Bermuda, really crystallizing our focus on nonprofits being our core client. And so the PROPEL program being really what will become our flagship program around nonprofit organizational development. It fits within the capacity building stream of work that we're doing. We also support collaboration, coordination, and seek to act as a champion for the sector. But this will be sitting in that capacity building work somewhere between training and consulting services. The reason for the Propel program is what we recognize is we've got a lot of training opportunities for individuals, but at an organizational development level, we felt that there is more that we need to be doing to help organizations sort of take it to the next level and strive towards organizational maturity. Maturity being sort of a life cycle phase title of a way to capture where organizations are when they are well developed, got solid infrastructure in place, executing well on core programs, and really maximizing their ability to execute on their mission and have the most impact on the community. So our goal as an organization has shifted to thinking about how do we help nonprofit organizations reach maturity. It takes investment in capacity building that is time and money. And so we're trying to make this as easy as possible for nonprofits. It's still a lot of work to do, but the thought around the program is to provide a wraparound program that supports infrastructure development, but also while you have access to consultants, get strategy out of it as well. So it's we did a survey of many nonprofit accelerator programs, looked at some entrepreneurial accelerators as well. And what we thought was missing in many of them was the opportunity to also just develop a strategic plan with it. So we're going to talk a little bit about that, but it's about infrastructure development, building your internal policies and processes so they're in alignment with best practices that will help the organization to grow. And with that, increase the ability theoretically to achieve financial health through improved fundraising. So Propel is a two-tiered nonprofit accelerator program. We're going to refer to two different tiers. There's the readiness program and the accelerator program. But at a high level, the goal is that everyone moves eventually through the full accelerator program. That includes these 6 different components. So starts with an application and a readiness assessment. The readiness assessment is really the start to the capacity building work. It looks at a very basic checklist of what are the policies and processes that you already have in place to get a baseline of the infrastructure that exists. It's quite a rudimentary checklist, but it's even completing the application is a helpful capacity building exercise because it shows you just right away in completing it some things that you don't have that you might need to have, for example, and shows you where you do have some baseline policies. So it starts out with that application. We'll talk a little bit more about that application. Then it moves into an organizational assessment. So we work with the Core Capacity Assessment Tool, or the CCAT, which is an evidence-based nonprofit organizational assessment tool that looks in depth at all core competencies across a nonprofit, weights them to your life cycle phase, and then gives recommendations on priorities for capacity building relative to your life cycle, because what you should focus on to move from startup to adolescence is different from what you should focus on if you're more mature organization in adolescent phase working towards full maturity. So it weights that for you. That sort of happens at the very beginning of the program, and then it moves into the core program phase, where there's coaching and planning sessions as well as training sessions. And then finally, there's a wrap-up phase where the board aligns on all decisions and action plans made. We're going to deep dive into the design a little bit further. The core program team will be Dr. Claudette Fleming and Dr. Glenn Ferris. They're going to be the lead coaches for the program. Shana Williams and myself will also be providing support for the program around getting the applications and the assessments done. And we've also collectively been building out the trainings, which are based on the BNSC standards, or the Bermuda National Standards Certification. Bermuda National Standards Committee certification standards. Dr. Tara Hines from BNSC has also been involved with the program design phase, but it's important for us to state the program is not certified by BNSC itself because we're still in design phase. We will seek that after we deliver the pilot. So this is potentially a hectic looking slide, but it's our way to capture the two tiers of the program. You'll see on the right-hand side what says PROPEL Readiness, and on the left-hand side, PROPEL Accelerator. This is capturing the fact that there's two tiers. The core program is on the left-hand side, the accelerator program. It's a 2-year track for nonprofits that are in adolescence or maturity that are not already BNSC certified. Starts again with organizational assessment in March, cohort trainings and coaching sessions from April to November, wrapping up with a retreat, and then the follow-through year is implementation support. I'm going to deep dive a little bit more on what occurs through April to November and what the implementation support phase would be. The cohort training sessions are based around the BNSC standards. We'll look at the key learning competencies at a high level for those so you understand what those sessions are, but those are 1 day a month, 6 hours, 9 to 3, including lunch. Where if you just take finance, for example, we'll deep dive what the financial management standard, what is required for BNSC readiness, as well as sort of importance behind the standard. So we're not teaching to the standard, we're teaching the values that are being encouraged by the standard, but you would come away with an awareness of what is required for certification. So that is the month April, for example. The coaching session that occurs in April, then you would be assigned of one of two coaches. You would look at your application and readiness assessment checklist. You would look at your organizational assessment results, and your coach would be talking with you about what's in place already, what's not in place, where are your gaps, what's your action plan for BNSC readiness, and what are your 3-year strategic priorities. So that's where you're getting strategy development as well as infrastructure development. So you're building the action plan, but because we know that then you're jumping into the next month of training and coaching, we're not expecting implementation of any of those plans during the April to November phase. So each month has a different focus. In December or January, we would take then the full board and leadership team, doesn't have to be only the executive director, to a 1-day retreat that would present all of the action plans that the executive director or organizational leader that's been working with the coach has mapped out for board input and board support. When it comes to BNSC certification readiness, the board needs to be involved because they've got to be approving policies. So the board has to be aligned on that. And then there's a 1-year implementation phase. The idea is that it should be feasible if you are eligible for the accelerator, that you would get yourself ready for certification in a 1-year period. That 1-year period being February to December 2025, because the core program phase is 2024. For organizations that are not functioning in adolescence or maturity, potentially in startup, or what we think is going to be more likely in a decline phase, so where there are some pieces that are preventing a dedicated focus on straight infrastructure development, there is a 1-year readiness track to support organizations in getting themselves ready for the accelerator. So the hope is that organizations after 1 year would then track into the accelerator, but that readiness program starts off also with the organizational assessment, but then there's a full archival review, which is an assessment of just where the organization is at. So this is a great opportunity for organizations to get some guided support where they might be facing some challenges. That's going to look at, what's going on with governance, what's going on in your finances, what's going on in your program design and evaluation. And it will provide then a report back to the leadership team. So the board and the executive team would be involved then in issue identification and stabilization. So this is considered short-term action planning versus BNSC readiness action planning. Coming up with a 6-month action plan to address some of the key issues that have been identified that are presenting as barriers for an organization to be moving forward. Once that plan has been identified, those organizations will also get the monthly coaching check-ins, but really it's for the organization to be implementing. There will also be referrals to targeted trainings. And then in November, there would be decisioning where the leadership would be supported in having a conversation around whether referral to the accelerator program makes sense, if strategic wind down makes sense, if merger or something else makes sense, but having some guided discussions around that. The goal being that if you're in the readiness, once you track into accelerator, and for those that track through accelerator, then after the 2-year period, you're ready for BNSC certification handoff. This is very high level, just so you can get a sense of what some of the things are being covered in those training sessions, which are part of the BNSC certification process. And we're going to Glenn's going to speak a little bit to why BNSC certification, what's the value of that. But you'll have these slides. We are recording this session, so if you join late, you can flip back. But this is just giving you a visual here of the types of topics that are covered. So this aligns with the 7 standards required for certification. If you're for human services, you would then move on to accreditation, but PROPEL does not cover accreditation standards. So I'm going to hand it over to Glenn, and then we'll take questions.
There we go. Just making sure that I unmute my microphone so I don't sit there speaking quietly at you all. Well, thank you everybody for coming. I hope that you're interested in what we have to say about this program. I think it's a really valuable program, and I think it's going to bring a lot of value add to the nonprofit sector in Bermuda specifically. So that's great. And that's what I'm going to start talking about. So what is the value of the PROPEL program? We're going to look at that in a couple of different ways. What does PROPEL do for the nonprofit? Well, as you heard Nicola talking about, it's going to allow you to put together a robust assessment of your specific nonprofit organization, where you are, what you're doing well, things that you need to work on. It gives you a nice overall assessment of where you are. And it will guide you with the help of the facilitators, the coaches, in developing and aligning your board on a 4-year strategy. Now, again, you notice that we call ourselves facilitators or coaches. We're not the ones that will be coming up with the strategy. That will be for their organization to be responsible for, obviously, but we will help guide you through that process. It'll support you in developing best practice policies and procedures, which in turn will get you ready for BNSC certification for that process. Now, as we've been discussing this and as we've been putting together the program and developing it, one of the things that we've all talked about and that we all agree on is that we are not really doing this program to teach you how to become accredited through the BNSC accreditation process or certification process. Our goal is to provide you with tools and information to allow you to function according to best practices, because our belief is that when a nonprofit is functioning according to best practices, they will be able to survive actually and thrive through the BNSC accreditation or certification process. A lot of people, when they're looking at certifications or accreditations, and self-studies and stuff, it can be very daunting. But I'm a strong believer in the fact that if you have the right tools and you're practicing in the right way, then whatever exam that you're asked to do, you should be able to do it because you're doing the right things that you need to be able to do in order to function. Therefore, you're doing the right things you need to do in order to be certified or accredited. So it's a very slight difference, but I think it's really an important one that we need to focus on. Another value of the PROPEL program is that it increases your chance of meeting your fund development targets. And there's a lot of reasons for that. One of the reasons is because, again, if you're looking at your finances and you're looking at your fund development and you're looking at your governance pieces specifically, if you're practicing according to best practices, that automatically gives you the tools to optimize your fundraising. But the other thing that's really an important piece of it is that donors do like to see and understand that organizations are functioning according to best practices. And having something like the BNSC certification does put that message out there. So when donors see an organization that is accredited or certified by any governing body, that gives them a better sense of security that that organization is doing what they need to do and functioning how they need to function in order to be able to move their mission forward and to be able to show outcomes and show impact. And that way the donors will know, oh, this is an organization that I'm going to be comfortable investing in because I'm investing in an organization that I want to know is going to be able to provide something to the community as a result of my investment. So that's a couple of different ways that it helps you meet the fund development targets. It provides you with a dedicated and experienced nonprofit leader as a coach. I feel a little bit funny saying that since I'm talking about myself, but there you go. And it creates opportunities for you to build deeper connections with your nonprofit peers. There's going to be a cohort of people that are doing these, both the readiness and the accelerator programs. And so you'll be able to form liaisons with the leaders of the other nonprofit organizations that are working on the same curriculum and working through the same program that you are. And I always say that we can learn as much from as learners, we can learn as much from each other as learners as we can learn from our coaches and facilitators and the people that are in charge of the program. And I even take it as far to say that even when I'm in charge of the program, or I'm being the coach or the facilitator, or I'm the educator, or whatever term you want to use, I can learn as much from my students as they can learn from me. So this is a really, really great opportunity to learn from each other and for us all to learn from one another. So what does PROPEL do for the sector? So it improves sector-wide nonprofit standards of practice. And that's really what we're aiming for. We want to see, as Nicola mentioned earlier with the rebrand and where we're focusing now, we want to elevate the function of the nonprofit sector in Bermuda. And this kind of a program helps us do that. This kind of a program helps not only your organization, but the entire sector as a whole start to function at a higher level of operational activities, really. And when you do that, you have better outcomes, and you obviously then have better long-term impact. It also then, which is the second point there, it strengthens the nonprofit sector's ability to impact our community. And that's what our goals are. We all are in this business because we want to have an impact on the community. And we feel that this PROPEL program will assist all of us in doing that. And then speaking of outcomes and impacts, how are we going to know? So our measurements are going to be that within 2 years of the program completion, not of the readiness piece, but of the accelerator piece, the PROPEL participants will successfully become BNSC certified or accredited. As well, we will monitor the life cycles of the participants, and our expectation is that the participants will advance their life cycle phase of development, which demonstrates an increased ability to execute on their missions. Next slide. And another thing that I really like about this program is that one of the things we always talk about as nonprofits and in the nonprofit sector is the idea that we really need to be collaborating with one another. And this is really an excellent example of a collaboration between two nonprofits in Bermuda, the Nonprofit Alliance of Bermuda and the BNSC. And I think that together we'll be able to have synergy that allows us to provide better outcomes and better impact than each of us would do separately. So what is BNSC? Well, that's the Bermuda National Standards Committee, established way back in 2005, so almost 20 years ago, as the local independent nonprofit. And it provides accreditation, an accreditation track, which is for organizations that are providing human services. And it provides a certification track, which is for organizations that are not providing human services and are in some other aspect of the nonprofit field. The BNSC seeks to improve the quality of the services of all the nonprofits and the human services organizations in Bermuda, much the same as what we're trying to do. They were established in Bermuda as the first country to formally replicate the US-based Council on Accreditation. And that's a very strong organization that accredits lots of nonprofits in the States. So to be able to replicate that type of activity in a country as small as Bermuda is pretty remarkable. So that's something that they can rightfully feel quite proud of, because the COA is widely recognized as one of the best human service accrediting organizations. So we've talked about the two different tracks. So what is certification? So that's a review process based on the BNSC standards of excellence. And what it does is it demonstrates that an organization provides high quality services ethically and with the highest standards of care. And the standards can guide organizations in developing best practices. But again, you're not aiming to pass an exam, you're aiming to develop best practices so that you then can become certified. And what's the value of certification? Well, as we talked about a little bit before, it endorses the organization as having a high standard of practice over and above the basic requirements of the Charities Act, which gives the nonprofits themselves the confidence to know that they're functioning in a way that enhances their ability to deliver on their mission and to make those outcomes, to see those outcomes and to make that impact change over the long term. And it gives the donors confidence that the nonprofit is operating with best practices and therefore is more likely to have higher outcomes and a greater impact, which is what they want to see. And it also demonstrates the transition of a nonprofit from a younger stage of maturity, like adolescence, to a mature phase, which again indicates that they are able to function on a higher level, that they will get better outcomes, that they will have more impact. And it shows that they're doing so with integrity and ethics, which I think is really important. Next slide. So what's the eligibility for the PROPEL programs? And so the eligibility criteria are basically listed out here. You need to make sure that the organization is one that is already functioning at a solid, let's say, level. So you need a full-time executive director, you need an active board and an active board chair, you must have a treasurer, the board must meet on a consistent schedule, and we're not dictating what that schedule is, but it must be consistent and it should work for your organization. You need to have current and updated financial statements. You do need to have already developed some program logic models or a strong, robust theory of change. And then the practical things are there has to be the ability and the funds available for the executive director to be able to attend 8 full-day cohort sessions and 8 coaching sessions that Nicola has spoken about previously during this little presentation. The management team and the board have to be willing to attend a full one-day strategic retreat. And that will be set up in a way that it will minimize the time required from people, but they do need to be able to commit to that one full day. And the board has to be ready to review and approve policies that are created during this program. So in other words, again, the program is not just simply to be able to say, okay, now we're ready to be certified. The program is to say we are ready and committed to moving forward as an organization.
Dan, I just want to jump in here,
sure.
and we may get more questions on this at the end, which is fine, but this is the eligibility criteria for the accelerator track of
right,
PROPEL.
sorry, I should mention that.
No, yeah. I mean, it's not spelled out on here. And it's not to say if one of these does not exist, we would still encourage people potentially to apply, because we can then give if you're not quite ready, we can let you know what needs to be done to become eligible. Like if you don't have a theory of change or any program logic, we have a training in February that you can develop that. It's just some of these things are core things that need to be in place in order to be able to successfully make it through the program. So we would just say focus on getting this eligibility criteria in place, because these are some fundamental pieces that you need that you should focus on first before doing a program like this. So it's not meant to be exclusionary. Actually, if you don't meet, say there's a range of these that you don't meet, it really is just saying that's your capacity building 101 right there, is get a chair, get a treasurer, get the board meeting, get a program logic model, and then think about PROPEL, which is much more intensive. So we're not meaning to be exclusionary here. It's just the point I was trying to make. And we can answer more questions on that criteria, but I'll let Glenn keep going.
Yeah, that's a great point, Nicola, and thank you for making that clear. I think that's great. So what is the cost of Propel? So for the pilot round, no charge. So anybody who's thinking about signing up should maybe strongly think about it, because it's a good deal. But it helps us to sort of figure out how to tweak the program and how to make it that much better. So that's no charge for the pilot program. For future cohorts, we're expecting, and this is going to be a little bit subject to discussion with the BNSC, but we're expecting that for the accelerator track, it's going to be a $3,000 fee, which is about 75% subsidized of what the true cost of the program is. And a portion of that $3,000 would then cover the fees that you pay to BNSC for certification. So you don't pay $3,000 for the accelerator program and then $2,200 or $2,500 or whatever it is for BNSC. A portion of that accelerator fee is going to cover the BNSC certification fees. There is going to be no fee associated with the readiness track, but there are stricter eligibility requirements or criteria. And people who are organizations who complete the readiness track and then move on to the accelerator program, as when they get to that sort of decision tree of, do we move forward? Is this time for merger? Is this time for a strategic wind down? Wherever they land, if they're moving on to the accelerator, then they will be required to pay a fee for the accelerator track, which again, a portion of that would cover the BNSC certification process at the end of the accelerator program. Next. So how do you apply? Well, we're in the 21st century, so it is an online application form, so that's nice. And it asks for a couple of things that you can see outlined here: a mission and problem statement. What are the key outcomes that you measure? How many clients you serve per year, projected expenses, number of staff, years in operation. And then there's a BNSC policy and process checklist that you will be filling out as well. And we ask for you to submit your most recent financials, and they can be audited or not, depending on the income, the budget of your program. But also, if you are, for example, an organization that is that has to accredit their, or sorry, that has to audit their financials as per the Charities Act, then depending on where you are in your yearly cycle, we'll sort of work that out as well as your program logic model or your theory of change. Next slide. And then selection. So we're anticipating that we'll get more applicants than we have room for initially, at least. And so what we'll do as the team is we'll review the applications that are presented and consider some of these factors. So number one is whether the eligibility criteria are met, or whether there's a process in place that is allowing you to move toward having that those criteria met by the time the program starts. Another piece is what outcomes you are measuring and the number of clients impacted. And organizations who are working towards vital signs outcomes, which you can find online, will be prioritized, since those are evidence-based community need priorities. So we're kind of looking at which organizations, based on what they're working toward and what their outcomes are, which organizations would be sort of a more critical need for our particular community here in Bermuda. And those are the ones that will be prioritized in the selection process. If you're applying for the readiness track, which is again for the organizations that are in startup or in crisis/decline, the organizations must, the onus is on the organization to make the case that they are providing a basic, critical, and essential service, such that if their organization ceases to exist, then a clear hardship would be experienced by the beneficiaries. So it's that kind of idea that if something is going to leave a huge gap, if it disappears off the nonprofit scene, then that's something that's an organization that we're really going to be very interested in prioritizing for our readiness track if they are experiencing considerable difficulties in decline or crisis at the time that they're speaking to us.
Glenn, just want to jump in here. There's only one application, so you won't necessarily apply for accelerator or readiness.
Right.
If you are if you are deferred from the accelerator just because of capacity reasons, and for whatever reason we had to prioritize someone else, you would just be waitlisted. If you're ineligible because there are other things going on that need to be addressed, that's where the consideration is given as to whether you would be funneled into readiness or not. And the reason is that is a very, very costly program that we are not anticipating charging for, with the goal that there are some core essential nonprofits providing critical services that need help. And so those would be prioritized for readiness. For others that don't necessarily fit that, we would provide an action plan of what to do to get ready to be accepted into a future accelerator. This is all kind of, we don't really know what's going to come in the application phase. So we're trying to prepare as though we're way oversubscribed and have to be super selective. So this is our attempt to be very transparent around how we would be selective and make sure that the resources we are putting into organizations are being deployed with responsibility. So we threw a lot of information at you. We can go back to any slides. We can answer any questions, but we can take questions, observations. That's the formal presentation. And I'll keep the slides up in case anyone wants to refer back. Any questions on anything that you'd like to go back to? Marion.
Thank you. So that's a very interesting project that you've got going. I'm interested in applying. I'm just wondering, what size cohort are you wanting to work with initially?
Great question. It's 4 for the accelerator, 2 for readiness. So it's a small group.
And you said that the application is on the website?
It's not available yet. We're finalizing the documentation on Friday, so we will circulate it Friday, and then there'll be just under 4 weeks to submit. We don't think that application will take, if anyone's done a full organizational assessment, it doesn't take like that amount of time. The BNSC checklist is, it might be like 60 things, but it like financial management policy, internal controls, and you're just checking. So other than the pieces that Glenn explained, it shouldn't take too long. The more of the time is going to be for you all to share with your boards and get the initial board interest in, share the recording and get your board to consent before you apply, because you would want them to be privy to the information.
Thank you.
Did that explanation feel clear in terms of what you would actually be doing if you are a participant? Just would be, okay, that's helpful. Thanks, Marion. Surprised, no other questions? Is everyone clear on the sort of how you get a strategic plan out of the program? Because that's an important piece for us. Go ahead, Calvin.
Yeah, sorry, Nicola, I can't figure out where the hand raise is, but as you know from our conversations and so forth, I'm not sure where we are in this. I mean, we're already BNSC certified, but I feel this is something that's valuable for us because we're restructuring our board, and so there'll be new board members and so forth. So I think that will be, I really do think that this is something that we could benefit from, but I just don't know where we would fit. I mean, as I say, we're already BNSC certified, but at the present time, we're going to be over the next few months looking to hire an ED as well as restructure our board.
Yeah, Calvin, we can talk offline about what the timing that could make sense for impact.
Okay.
The key would be having the full-time executive director in place. If you're an organization that has been certified in the past, but maybe there's been so much leadership change that the current leadership doesn't live and breathe the standards, this still would be relevant.
Yeah, I think so. I think so.
I think this was the slide you were looking for, Danny. feel free to let us know if there's any other slides you wanted to look at. So the application, sharing the mission and the problem statement, key outcomes, client served. And again, this is really to help us, one, to make sure that you're clear on what you're doing and don't necessarily need to first participate in program design training, for example. And then again, if we had more applicants than what we could accommodate, we would seek to take in those that are having where the program has the biggest impact. So we would be looking who's serving the most number of clients with what type of outcomes. The vital signs alignment, you don't have to have word for word the same wording as vital signs, but vital signs is a pretty broad listing of community outcomes that are based on local needs. So that's why we're benchmarking to vital signs versus just having a subjective opinion on the outcomes that you are working towards. But the specific wording doesn't need to be the same as long as the essence is, that's what we're going to be used, is the essence there. I'll kind of skim back through in case seeing the slides jogs any questions. If you're clear and want to log off, you can log off. Again, this was the eligibility criteria. Really needing the full attendance of the ED at those through March to November, full day training sessions, and then the follow-up coaching sessions. That's some information about BNSC. And these were the topics. So we got governance, risk management and prevention, financial management, quality, performance quality improvement or PQI, client rights, human resources, administrative and service environment. And then we've added a piece at the end on branding.
Nicola, you said that this was being recorded. This will be made available to participants, the recording?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Danny, would we consider an organization without a full-time ED? I think we would consider it. We would probably just have a secondary conversation. The concern is that the program is intensive. So if somebody's not a full-time person in a leadership role, so it could be that there was another person in a leadership role in an organization, because I know Kaleidoscope is a little bit different in that the executive director is not full-time, but there are full-time staff. So I think it's a unique scenario. The idea is that there needs to be, this program might be too intensive for organizations that's fully operating with part-time, but where there are full-time staff, I think secondary conversations can be had. And then I think, Marion, you wanted to go back to eligibility. Any questions on any of the eligibility pieces or concerns about those? Again, where these aren't met, it just means we think that they should be your priority focus versus this program. Because these are some sort of core fundamental pieces that are needed at an organizational level. Any other questions? Any other slides anyone would like to look at? All right. Well, I'm going to stop the recording.